There is turning data into action, Cisco's Splunk strategic blueprint on AWS. Really what that is we hear a lot, everywhere we go, we hear a lot about the Cisco acquisition. Everybody know that Cisco acquired Splunk in here, right? And then a lot of times I go in front of clients, they're like, what does that mean? So me and him got together and we said, well, let's just go address it because we're talking about it all the time anyway. And so next slide. Real quickly about us is I am the field CTO for cybersecurity and infrastructure. Quick background so you know who the hell I am. You guys don't mind if I cuss, right? They probably do, but I came from, I started hacking when I was 12, 13, right? Ended up graduating high school when I was 15 because I hacked my school. They didn't know what to do with me. So I ended up joining the military. I stayed in the military for most of my career. My specialty was anti-terrorism. Ended up going into the cyber protection teams for the National Mission Force, and then going into the private sector. Ended up doing, I went to Cisco, ran their MSSP, and then went to Red Seal for about a year, understanding their CEO is a friend of mine. And then went back to, I went to Ernst & Young to be don't hold that against me, please don't throw anything at me, as a consultant. Right, never thought I'd be a consultant, but it was a good time. I learned a lot. I ended up taking over North America's SIM, so there's probably not a SIM out there that I know. And then now I've been at Splunk for the last 2 years.
Yeah.
And I specialize, I'm kind of like the consultant that you don't have to pay for. We invested heavily in advisory, and so that's a little bit about my background.
Awesome. My name is Michael Guccia. I actually run our security advisory organization for Splunk. It's a group of 9 individuals, myself being the director. And really our role in advisory is to make sure our customers get the most out of the platform, the Splunk platform, whether that be additional use cases, basically just generating value on this platform. To give you a little bit about my background, I spent most of my career on the practitioner side of the house, like Tony. Prior to joining the dark side, as my friends and colleagues like to say, I was Senior Vice President at MasterCard International, where I was responsible for basically their core network. Anything that touched the $5.5 trillion a year transaction network was in my responsibility. So I had the NOC, the SOC, anything that processed a transaction. Prior to that, I was at Express Scripts for a number of years, where I was hired as their CISO, but ended up running operations and did 11 years in healthcare before they called CISO, so hence the gray hair. But we're really happy to be here with you with our partner AWS and to share you a little bit about what's going on at not only Splunk, Cisco, but what's going on in the cyber security industry in general and as a whole. So real quick, to just address the elephant in the room, as Tony mentioned, last year Cisco announced they were acquiring Splunk, and that acquisition was supposed to close this October, so basically last month, a month and a half ago. But it closed in record time. It cleared all SEC audits, and we were cleared to close as early as March of this year. And the reason why it cleared so quickly is because the two companies have almost no overlapping technologies. They really do fit hand in glove in a way that was sort of unexpected by our stockholders as well as the Cisco stockholders. But it's been a great ride so far, and we did successfully close the deal in March, and now we are Splunk, a Cisco company. So what does that mean for our customers? Because Cisco has had various different acquisitions over the years. Some they've handled very well, some were not handled as well. I'll first put it into perspective. The largest Cisco acquisition until Splunk was worth $2 billion. The Cisco acquisition of Splunk was $27 billion. So we're talking a whole different scale of an acquisition. And it really does build out Cisco's software portfolio. Most people think of Cisco as a hardware company. If you think of what Splunk is, we're a software company. That's what we do, and we do it very, very well. So this acquisition really has come together very, very nicely. And to give you an example of how they're treating us at Splunk, they're actually adding to us. They're investing in the Splunk platform. So day one, our AppD teams, both engineering and sales, were moved into the Splunk universe, so to speak. They became Splunkers, and they're now part of our observability team. In addition, our CEO, Gary Steele, who was one of the champions of this acquisition, he was promoted to President of North American Sales for Cisco. So he runs all of North America for Cisco. Again, another sign that Cisco has 27 billion reasons to get this acquisition right. Cisco's making a number of other investments, not only in our portfolio and our time frame. We'll talk a little bit more about AI in a minute, because I know it's become a drinking game term, but we'll highlight that in just a minute. But just to give you an idea, their budget for AI at Cisco was our entire R&D budget. So just to put it in perspective, like, we are going to be able to take advantage of a lot of investment and a lot of R&D that Cisco puts into their technologies, and bring that into the Splunk universe. Anything to add?
No, I think you did it all.
I'm not going to drain this slide. This is just a comparison slide to give you an idea of the numbers. I've kind of already highlighted the differences in the two organizations. I think the key is Splunk, and a lot of folks talk to me and they're like, hey, you have a great SIM or your SIM platform. I always correct customers and prospective customers and talk about that Splunk is not a product, it's a platform. It's not a SIM, it's the world's most advanced data analytics engine on the planet. And we happen to build the world's industry-leading SIM and observability platform on top of it. But most of our customers, when they buy Splunk for, let's say, security, don't use it for just security. They use it for many other different use cases, because the search platform is that powerful.
So what I want to highlight, how many in here is engineers? Right? I get it. You don't care about all that money crap, right? What you care about is how is it going to affect you and how is it going to work together. Anybody, raise your hand if you have Cisco at your company. Almost everybody, right? There's a lot of routing and switching. So the big key that I want people to take away from this is that Splunk is really, like you said, I always say that we're a data analytics platform that does security. I don't like to call us a SIM either. I think that that's limiting. Cisco provides the heartbeat. I started, like, I know networking. I started out networking. They provide the blood, the information, the data as it flows. Splunk makes sense of that data. Splunk can do anything with it. I'm not trying to sell you anything. I'm just telling you how I've used it. All right, we have a lot of different use cases. Cyber has evolved. We can't just do like simple endpoint security anymore. Right? You need to understand end-to-end visibility. But that's the big takeaway I want you to think about, is that there is a natural merger between these two technologies.
All right, so moving on a little bit to something that's near and dear to my heart, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about digital resiliency. So this is a term that was really coined over the last couple of years. Splunk started using it. A lot of other companies started using it. But I want to share with you a story of how I learned what digital resilience really meant. Back when I was at MasterCard, one of the last things I did was build a technical risk radar for the board of directors. They wanted to understand what risks MasterCard was facing to continue their operations in 10 different countries around the world. So I did my work. I got a whole bunch of people, a team. We got into a room. We had lawyers. We had compliance folks. We had the engineers, architects. And we built this really eloquent technical risk radar, which basically highlighted what we came up with were the top 11 risks that pose to our ongoing operations. When I went and presented this to the board, one of the board of directors challenged me and said, why is GDPR not on the list? And my answer was GDPR, that's a privacy law. It's a regulatory law, not really a technical risk. And he said, au contraire, there's data residency requirements, there's reporting requirements on data, there's data ownership requirements. And it taught me a really important lesson. This is where I really started thinking that what do the board of directors of all your companies want? They're expecting you to build digitally resilient information technology systems so that their day-to-day operations continue to operate. They do care about threats like cyber attacks and things of that nature, but they're also concerned with things like Black Friday, Cyber Monday, loads on the system, the war in Ukraine, for example. All these things have an impact on the digital resilience of organizations. And so we as IT practitioners really can't just focus in on cyber attacks and hackers. We have to focus on basically make sure that all of our systems are resilient all the time. When we talk about AI, I'm going to just share with you a little bit of the way I view AI as coming to play in our industry, in the cyber industry. So at Splunk, we're doing AI in 3 major segments. The first is already out and used by a lot of our customers. It's called AI Assistant. And basically what we're focused on AI is how do we make folks easier to operationalize our platform, easier to get value out of our platform. And so AI Assistant basically allows you to take natural language and turn it into search query, search language. Our search language happens to be SPL, but basically it takes, you can basically say, show me everywhere Michael is logged in the last week in the environment, and it'll generate a nice SPL query for you that you can fire up against your Splunk system. It also can do it in reverse. So you can take an existing Splunk query, put it into the tool, and it'll spit out in natural English what the query is actually attempting to do. The second area of investment we're going to be making into AI, and we think it's really important, is on assisting investigations. So basically helping analysts who are trying to figure out what bad threat actors are in their environment and what they're doing and who's trying to exfil data. When you start seeing alerts, start giving suggestions to the analyst on what steps they should take next. Again, making them more efficient. And that second investment is also include the ability to generate an executive summary, because I don't know anybody who likes to write an after action report or a summary of an event. Like, here, Mr. CIO, this is what happened, this is why we're on the front page of the paper. But it has all that information, so Splunk already has all that data, so we're going to basically help create those reports for our customers. And the third area, which is we're investing in right now, is actually using AI to look at the data in the Splunk system to identify threats that we may not already are detecting using our built-in ML capabilities that we leverage in our platform. So those are really the three areas, and that's coming out next year. Really excited about that. And some of this is all getting supercharged by the investments Cisco's able to make into our platform. So once again, a better together outcome.
Anybody in here use AI at work? Copilot, Gemini, OpenAI, anybody? Kind of cool, right? I've named mine Lucy because I don't know if you've seen that movie with Scarlett Johansson. Anybody seen that movie? It's great, right? She's always evolving until to the end where she's everywhere, right? And I named her that way, and she talks to me. She has a nice little voice. She's a little better than Siri, in my opinion, Alexa. But she helps me in my day-to-day. But the reason why I'm asking that is that AI is becoming a part of our daily lives. AI is nothing more than no matter whatever you want to use it, what logic it is there to answer a question in plain language and help you speed up your job. Splunk's approach to this, and if you look on the screen, our approach to this is our AI is going to stay within our data set. It's not going to touch the internet. It's going to be a one-way trust, right? Why is that important? Because Splunk pretty much sees all your data, right? You don't want your data going into the internet. Do you guys remember when AI first came out and you saw it on some of the vendors where they were like releasing certain, you can ask it, and some of that client data was out there? We took that to heart. We said, oh my God, that's not something we want. And so we made every one of our AI, our approach is to answer a question, to speed up the user, to speed up the user experience. That's our approach, right? To answer a question, to get faster. There's only two, in cybersecurity, there's only two things that we ever care about. Time to detection, time to mitigation. That's it, right? There's a lot that goes into that, but that's it. And so our AI approach is to answer that question. We're a huge data analytics company, so we're taking all this data and we're trying to simplify it so you can get on target faster. That help everybody?
All right, so one of the things that's really important and what is exciting to me is that joining the forces with Cisco, now we have visibility that we've never had before. You can't defend against something that you don't have visibility to it. Now in the cybersecurity industry, we've taken a lifelong approach to data of focusing on high density, high value data, right? Because most companies can't afford to put all of their data into a platform or into a data platform. So in security, as a former CISO, we always focused on that high value, high density data being what we usually put into our SIMs. Well, I learned an important lesson last year and a half ago. When the war in Ukraine broke out, one of our large oil and gas companies, who's a large customer of ours, we're bringing in around 10 terabytes a day into our platform. And they called us and said, we're really, really concerned because we know we have data that we're not bringing in, specifically from our AWS platforms, and we have assets, physical assets in Ukraine, and they were concerned. So they basically asked, can we bring another 35 terabytes into your platform so we can see what's going on? And obviously, being the good partner we are, we said yes, they brought it in. Within 2 hours, they found 4 active threats from Russia in their actual physical plants. Taught me a very good lesson. That is, we can no longer focus on the high density, high value data. We have to have visibility into all the data, or at least telemetry into all the data, because the really good threat actors, the ones that really have money and funding behind them, don't live in that high value, high density data. They're gonna live outside of that where you're not gonna detect them. They know what you're looking at and they know how to avoid it. So when we look at Cisco and Splunk becoming better together, we're gonna have the ability to get telemetry and insights from the networks and systems that Cisco partners with us at a whole new level. We're gonna continue to be Switzerland. We're still gonna work with all the other network partners out there. That's what we do. That is in our DNA. But I think as we come together and partnering with AWS, as I believe we're the third largest workload now on AWS. I think the combination of Cisco, AWS, and Splunk is really gonna have an impact on the industry. Anything to add?
Nothing to add?
All right, let's talk a little bit about what we believe, what the future is going to hold for companies that are going to lead not only the cyber industry, but the IT industry. We talked a lot about AI, so I'm not going to go into that any further, but companies are going to have to be able to leverage architectures that enable both agility, velocity, and quality. Without those three, companies are going to fall behind because there's other companies that do this extremely, extremely well. And at the same time, they have to be aware of the number of risks and changing risks, the cyber landscape that's out there that is changing almost on a daily basis. We mentioned geopolitical tensions, the war in Iraq, new government mandates are coming out every day for privacy and security, and unknown threats like quantum computing threaten to fundamentally change how we secure our information and our assets in our four walls.
Yeah, so I kind of like this slide because it kind of gives you an idea of everything. Like, everything is data. Agreed? Where everything is data. You need to have, I always look at it, I always say ecosystem monitoring. Because, do you guys remember a little storm called Helena? You remember that just happened? I live in North Carolina. It affected us pretty heavily, right? If you see some of the companies, what we're seeing is companies are bringing in like weather data, right? So they can be a part of their EAP plan. It's not just an incident response anymore. It's an EAP, right? You have to understand how the traffic is flowing and all that data that's flowing in. I've seen with some of the financial institutions, they're bringing in unemployment data, right? Because they want to get ahead of foreclosures. Not just, remember I said we're a data analytics platform that does security, right? But everything is data, so everything has to be secure, right? So you have to be a part of the conversation, right? One of the things I like about it is like I've just recently, I'm helping a space company design a thing around understanding micrometeorites, right? Because you have a lot of space junk up there. You guys seen it? So they're using that as a use case to do trajectory. He was talking about quantum. Anybody seeing quantum? Know anything about quantum DDoS attacks? You guys have seen those lately? Have you seen it on the rise? Like, there's no defense against it because they hit your network so heavy and so hard. It's hard to be resilient against it. And so we're trying to incorporate that in. The only way you can orchestrate it is to isolate quickly, right? And a lot of times we try to work with the vendors and whatever, but you have to have that end-to-end visibility. Third-party hacks are on the rise. We guys all see. Let's talk about integrated data. And so all those things are coming in, but you have to start, and I think we've forgotten this. We've become reactive. We need to be proactive, right? By getting visibility and across it and looking at data in a different way, I think is super important. Now, one of the things that I like to talk about is like threat versus risk. And I travel a lot. I do a lot of IR. A lot of companies come in. Like I said, I'm like the free consultant that they can leverage to help them. And I always define risk and threat in two different ways. And this is how we're approaching it. So how many people in here are Splunkers, have Splunk at their home? All right, so in core, Splunk core, that's really risk. That's your data analytics platform. ES is your threat. That's your SIM. So anybody in here in cybersecurity? Do we like people playing in our SIM? I don't hear anybody in here. Come on, look at the guy with the glasses. Come on. You like people in your SIM? No, right? So by understanding data as it flows, that is threat versus risk. In risk, we like our network teams. We can do CMD validation. We can do AI validation. We can do OU validation. We can understand our environment. We can do trend analysis, all these different things, asset inventory. You have to understand your assets. All that flows into the SIM. We've come into a history where we say, give me everything. You know, you ever hear cyber guys like, give me everything? Then we complain that we got too much because we're not defining it, all right? You have to define risk versus threat. Threats will always evolve. Risks can be mitigated, right? You can reduce risk by understanding your controls and understanding. And this is, I'm not a slide ranger at any stretch of the imagination, but I built this to kind of show people that understanding the two and around their roles and responsibilities of each and the data that feeds those answers. So we can move on. Now, how do we do this? Now, how do we tie into the AWS ecosystem? I travel a lot, and what I find is that people stay within their comfort zones. They don't ever see all the free stuff that they have, all the different stuff that's out there. You know, I'm a real big guy about tools optimization, right? I'm kind of known like the Dave Ramsey of data, right? I like use what you have. Don't try to buy new. Everybody go to RSA. I call it Walmart for cyber, right? Everybody goes in, everybody's got a new idea. And I'm like, there's a lot of time, energy, and training that goes along with that. You have it on the AWS Marketplace. You already have it. You're just not using it. New doesn't always mean better. New tends to be new, and there is a learning curve that goes along with that, right? There's an implementation. Anybody in here is an engineer will tell you that new doesn't, by the time I get it all incorporated, there's something else that's new, right? Let me use what I have. Let me get what I understand the products that I have, and I can get you to maturity faster, right? And that's just my opinion. But you guys may have your own opinion. I've just been doing this for 30 years. Every time you implement new, I worked a case where they got pawned, and when I reviewed them, they had tried to go to a new SIM technology, right? And they said, well, we only have so much time. So they just ignored all the old data. And they just started, but the new one wasn't migrated yet. They didn't do a good data discovery. They didn't do data to outcomes. And they didn't keep their use cases updated. And so bad guys just walked right through because of a process. And so a lot of times what I tell them is take a look at what you have. You're already trained on it. You've already paid for it. Might as well use it. I mean, it's like our own house, right? It's like keeping a room in our house and we're just like, hey, I just might need that one day. How many people have a room in their house that you just keep it because you just might need it one day? Nobody. Nobody buys a car and says, you know, I'm just going to buy a car because one day, just one day, I might need it. Well, unless you're a prepper. But even a prepper does it, all right? We don't buy things that we don't need, and we buy it for a reason, so might as well use it. AWS Marketplace is a really good thing. What I find across the board is that companies only use about 10% of the capability of the tools that they purchase. Anybody agree with that statement? Come on, like, give me people. Like, let's be a little interactive. So let's move to the next slide.
Actually, I want to make a comment real quick.
Go ahead.
So the reality is, guys, products don't solve problems. And what I'll tell you, the hardest thing to do in software and operations is to operationalize the technology, right? If you buy a SIM and you just turn on, nobody watches it, nobody builds it into their daily processes, you don't get any products out of it. And unfortunately, we as an industry have had some really smart people see new attack vectors and create products to solve those or block those specific attack vectors. So a lot of practitioners go out there and every year it's buy another product, buy another tool, buy another this. The reality is that's very distracting and it's very draining. You don't actually get the value out of the platform unless you really operationalize it. I'll go talk to prospective customers for our own technology, and they're interested in our enterprise security platform. And I'll find out they have 2 people in cybersecurity, maybe 1.5. And the answer is, okay, this is great. We can sell you a product, but unless you operationalize, unless you actually make use of it, unless you actually build a strategy and a program around it, you're not actually going to get any value out of it. And you're not going to actually change your security posture or reduce your risk. So it's really, really important that as practitioners look at tools and tool sets, that we have to look at what is the overall strategy, what are we trying to achieve, and what are our aspirations, and what's possible. Because if we don't have the ability to operationalize it, you're not going to get the value or the benefit from it. And so you have this really, really great piece of technology that you're not leveraging.
Yeah, go to the next one. Now, a lot of times when we talked about the Cisco, we talked about the acquisition. A lot of people think Cisco is nothing but routing and switching, right? I'll be honest, I was one of them, right? I didn't know until I looked into it, all the different things. And this is just a sampling, right? It does a lot, right? Remember what I said, use what you have? A lot of times they already have it. Like I'm a big fan of Cisco ICE, right? Because it does NAC, it gives me asset inventory, it does it, now it goes all the way up to layer 7. Again, I love the capability of it, right? But a lot of times what we find is that people buy products in isolation. You ever seen that? Right? They buy products in isolation and then they're like, no, it's mine, you can't play. Right? And I've been on the calls. I'm like, you already have this product over here that does all these things, and these 3 guys are on your team and they want to use it, and you're saying no. I don't understand that. Our job is to protect the network. Our job is to simplify the network. More tools doesn't necessarily mean better outcomes. You agree with that? And so one of the things I wanted to show is like, hey, look, a lot of times you already have a lot of this stuff, right? And it's a lot. There's a whole I think there was like when I started going into it, I stopped somewhere around 250 products, right? Because there's only so much time in the day. Are they all best in class? I'm not going to say they are. I would never lie to you. You use what you need to help you with your maturity. That's not for me to tell you, right? I don't do sales. It's not my job, right? Go to the next slide. What I did was focus on data to outcomes. What are the outcomes and what is the maturity that I can achieve by using the tools that I have, right? At the end of the day, Splunk is very simple. You give me the data and I can give you an answer to a question. Whether that's cyber, whether that's IT ops, whether that's infrastructure, I do a lot of CMDB. Anybody in here have 100% CMDB? Nobody, right? A lot of times I'll focus there because we need to focus on asset and inventory. It's foundational. I can validate your CMDB really quickly. The use cases takes me like 15 minutes, right? Start there, right? Understanding your IT ops. All the guys, a lot of times I'll go in to see companies and they'll start grabbing from the endpoint. I'm like, why? I don't understand that. Start with Active Directory. See who's authorized to be on your net. Who has workstations and groups? It has sites and services. Understanding your data in flight, right? It doesn't always, I'll tell you as a guy who used to do stuff, bad things to bad people, if I get into your network layer, I own you. I don't need to get into the endpoint, right? But we've been focused on reactive for so long. And so I did a thing at a SANS thing a few years ago. And this kid goes, I was talking about the fundamentals, right? Going back to fundamentals, understanding patching. And he goes, that's so old school. I was like, dude, how do you think people get in? All right, we go after known vulnerabilities. I'm not going to create 0 days. It's too expensive, takes too long. I'm going to go after, so understanding what you're patching. You guys all remember a thing called Log4j in here? Right? I finally got a smile out of you, man. Thank you. All right? And people were taking forever. And you can always tell the people who had a hard time doing Log4j is they didn't understand their network. Right? It was an RDP exploit. right? There's a boundary. There's defense and left. We tend to forget defense and depth. And I know I'm getting into kind of like a lecture series, but this is kind of our approach. This is how we look at it. By having the data, I'm able to give you an outcome, right? That's why I say I'm not just a SIM. SIM is only focused on the end, the kind of cybersecurity. We started this whole conversation as what kind of data is not cybersecurity? None. Right? Look at the latest, do you guys know what the latest ransomware attack is? How long it takes once breach happens? Anybody? 6 to 8 minutes. Since I have a little time, you guys want to hear a funny story? All right? So been part of the hacking community for a long time, been part of DEF CON for a long time. The reason why, you guys remember in the oil in the Carolinas hack that happened? Remember if anybody on the East Coast, they took out the oil company and, some of you, and they took a lot of heat. You remember Microsoft went after and bought all the domains, right, for TrickBot, right? Every country in the world was going after them. Well, if you're on a lot of the forums, they're like, hey, look, this is a lot of heat, right? There's a whole reason why people don't attack the infrastructure because it brings up the heat. Ransomware is turned into a business, right? And so they were like, well, hey, why don't we just change it and we'll just do part of the packet. So they only encrypt part of the packet now. And it goes faster. It used to be 12 to 18 minutes, but now they're just doing part of the packet. And so they're doing it as a customer service thing. They want to help you get up faster once they decrypt you, right? They give you the decryption because that's what took so long to get up, right? Understanding that is really key because you have to understand the behavior behind of why your people are being attacked. Data is everything. It is everything. And I'm sorry I'm getting on my soapbox, but that's just how I am, all right? So live it. You came here for a reason. These are some outcomes that we do. Like for me, first thing I bring in ICANN. You know why I bring in ICANN? Because it tells me what domains are true and ones are not. I start there, right? So these are just, I wanted to give everybody when I do talks, I always want to have people have functional outcomes that they can do and they can take away and have a maturity. Next slide.
Before we go, just each of these areas are absolutely critical for a successful security program. One of the areas I just want to highlight, just to give you an example of how we're starting to leverage the capabilities across both organizations. Does everybody here know what Talos is for Cisco? So Talos is an industry-leading threat intelligence platform that Cisco owns and operates and sells to customers. We've already started pulling the Talos threat feed into our enterprise SIM. We're also pulling it into our Splunk attack analyzer capability, which is an anti-malware, anti-phishing capability. The idea is we can better enrich and better improve our ability to detect not only threats, but make the false positives much lower. In other words, base it on real threat intelligence. And so, for example, that's one area we're doing it, but in each of these boxes, there are going to be examples of where we're trying to ensure that we're leveraging capabilities across both companies to make sure our customers are getting the best and most secure platform for their security program.
I want to highlight one more thing,
yeah.
Right? How many people in here have to deal with like GRC? Love them, hate them, don't, whatever. One of the things that we did was to answer a question, we built like a compliance essential app, right? So you can be compliant all the time, not just a moment in time. Once you incorporated GRC into your daily, they stop bothering you because they go after the data owners and they don't come after you, right? And so we give it away free. You can download it, it's whatever. If you have Splunk, you can make it work. And it's totally tunable. We've expanded on it. We have HIPAA in there. We have NIST CSF. We have CMMC. I think we have GDPR in there now. A lot of them, because it was all point is taking data to answer a question. I want my threat responders focusing on threat. How do I mitigate risk? Incorporate GRC into the path of the packet. All right, so I wanted to kind of highlight that. I'm a big fan of it.
Last point I'll make on this slide is, on the top right-hand corner, you see business and industry focused. Regardless of what company, what platform, what tool you're using, a information or cybersecurity program or a cyber fusion center has to be situationally aware. What do I mean by that? You have to understand what's going on in your business and in your industry. So you need to have feeds into your environment to say not only what the threats are, but how is the business operating? Because if the business is being impacted, you'll want to be aware of it and start investigating whether it may be a cyber incident or not. One of the last things I did at MasterCard, I realized that every time there was an incident in the NOC, the SOC was busy chasing their tails, and every time there was an incident in the SOC, the NOC was chasing their tails. So one of the last things I did was actually put a SOC analyst in the NOC 24/7 because that allowed us to have situational awareness of what was happening on the business side of the house, both in security and in operations. So just kind of a best practice that I've learned throughout my career. Real quick, Cisco and AWS integrations. One of the things that Cisco did when they acquired us in March is they committed and have completed a 90-day refurbishment of all 63 TAs. So we have 63 different points of integration into Cisco products, all at various different levels of maturity and polishness. So what Cisco did was invest several $1 million in development to make sure all 63 TAs were upgraded so that customers of ours would see an integrated platforms with full feature capabilities. And these types of integrations are available not only for security, but also observability use cases. And the reason why Splunk can do both security and observability is, again, it's a search platform. That's what it's based on. So it has the ability to look at data outside the normal use cases that you may think. For example, most customers don't realize we have a fraud capability. We help some of the biggest banks and credit card companies in the world detect fraud on their transaction because, again, it's a search-based platform. We can detect anomalies very easily. So back to you, Tony.
Here's the new NIST. Anybody looked at the new NIST functions? It's been out there pretty heavily. Anybody? Right? So notice how they put governance in there. Now, this is the thing. We've been trying to get them to put governance into NIST for a long time, right? And the reason why we did that is because for an incident responder, governance tends to be a distraction. I always say anytime that a threat analyst is not focused on threat, then they're not, there's a risk about that, right? And so one of the things we wanted to do is kind of show you how you can do that. Like, what is that time to recover? What does that respond? We also talk about resilience a lot, right? Here at Splunk, a lot of times people use resilience as that new buzzword. It's like AI, right? Like last year it was zero trust. There's always a new buzzword. But we never really talk about what resilience is, right? I always say it's like, it's like bend like the willow, right? To be a flexible environment to respond, right? But a lot of times, and this is one of the things I try to do is I try to get the security organization to talk to the CTO organization. They own all the data, right? Cyber doesn't do Active Directory. We don't do infrastructure. We don't create firewall walls, right? We have to work with the infrastructure. They own all that data. And so I wanted to kind of show people a way that you can leverage NIST to have those conversations, right? Reach across, I always say, they reach across the aisle. People tend to not to communicate. So I use data to communicate, right? It simplifies things. It takes the personality in there. You guys ever been on those calls when you have that one guy, no, I'm not sharing, right? When you go to him with data and you say, hey, here is the risk for you for not sharing. Happens a lot in manufacturing and energy, right? But when you go in there and you show them the data, because again, we're cyber. We have all the data, but we've always been focused on reactive. We're not focusing on proactive, right? We know what the threats are. We know what the bad people do. We know how they do it. Why don't we just use data as a way to answer and have a conversation, right? And take the personality out of it, right? Just come to them with straight up data. And one that I wanted to kind of show is like map it back to the NIST because everybody kind of understands it. It's just plain language, right? Anybody here not know what NIST is? Nobody, right? It's taught, it's foundational. And so use those foundational things to have those conversations.
Yeah, the most important thing I think also in this slide, what you're calling out here, Tony, is security has to be built in by design, can't be bolted on. One of my biggest pet peeve terms in our industry, cybersecurity, is SecDevOps. SecDevOps. I can speak today. SecDevOps. Everybody's heard that term, right? If that's the term we're going to use, you've already lost. You're bolting security onto DevOps? No. DevOps should already be secure. We should build governance, the ability to recover, the ability to respond, detect, and protect into every layer that we build, not only in cybersecurity, but in IT as well. And I think that's, when we map it to something like NIST, you're building a program that can not only scale, but operate at speed. And if you do that, then again, security is no longer a bolt-on or an afterthought. 9 times out of 10, when it's an afterthought, it gets bypassed or not implemented correctly. So,
a lot of times I do a lot of IR, and I'll come in and I'm like, what's your framework? What's your data strategy? Do you have a data strategy document? What's your, I don't care what framework you use. You can use whatever you want, but have one. Have some kind of operational framework that can align everybody in your organization, not just cyber, the entire organization, and so that you all have it combined. It's going back to foundational stuff around defense in depth, right? Bad guys get through they know your network. Like I was talking to the young man right over there in the yellow shirt, calling him out right there, good looking man. We were talking about when I used to go after people, what did I do? I just ran an Nmap scan. I'd go after known vulnerabilities. What's the rule of thumb? If you try to patch everything, you patch nothing. Not everybody sees what they're patching. They're not mapping into their vulnerability reports. They're not mapping into their threat landscaping. They don't have a framework that they're aligned to. Some people speak one thing and the other people speak another thing. By going everything from a data perspective, and data to outcome, it changes the entire conversation. We were talking about Cisco, right? Cisco owns all of the network layer, right? Anybody here that didn't have a Cisco switch or router? Nobody, right? They have all the layer. By understanding how all that ties in and understanding how everything ties in together, I think is key and it's super important.
Real quick, I'm going to skip this slide. I just jumped to this. This is one of the last slides that we have here today. Talk a little bit about our observability practice in Splunk and how that's coming together. I know I'm a cybersecurity guy, so why am I talking observability? Because it is a big, important part to what is part of the digital resiliency story, right? To be able to make something, be able to track whether it's up or down, whether it's healthy, et cetera. The good news is, I mentioned that when we were acquired by Cisco, we looked at our observability stack and their observability stack, which was traditionally AppDynamics. And AppDynamics is mostly a hardware-based solution. Our solution is a cloud-based solution. So we really are taking the best of both worlds and integrating them together. So we're taking the best out of AppD and putting it into our observability suite and vice versa. What we're finding is it's really interesting at Cisco because Cisco wasn't traditionally as strong of a security company. They have security capabilities in AppDynamics that either were never sold or very rarely sold because they were selling to IT people. So we're looking at how we can integrate those capabilities. They have a RASP function, for example, a real-time application security and prevention capability. Not used a whole lot, was developed because they're in the stack, they're in the Java stack. But we're trying to figure out how we can leverage that and make sure that data, which is very interesting to a CISO or a SOC, how do we get that in front of them so they can investigate and respond? So that's pretty much the end of the content that we had today. We do have a few minutes if anybody has any questions they'd like to ask.